Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to the Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It's your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing. Today, we're discussing a watch that exploded onto the market like a supernova in 2021. This is the turquoise blue dial Rolex Oyster Perpetual 36, reference 126000, 36 millimeters in diameter, 904L steel. The watch is 11.7 millimeters thick from lug to lug, 43.4 millimeters with a 45.4 millimeter end link to end link total distance across the wrist and a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. This timepiece, of course, evokes Rolex's long-running association with Tiffany, which was always that of a supplier and retailer. Unlike the Patek Philippe Tiffany dials, which are actually created specifically for Tiffany by Patek, the Tiffany-signed Rolex dials were always signed by Tiffany's own contractor, leading to an acrimonious separation of the two brands in the early to mid-90s. Well, Rolex, with a little bit of a nod and a wink, is acknowledging that relationship that wasn't a relationship with this turquoise blue dial. The timepiece wears easily on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and you can see this really as a unisex watch. 36 is a very traditional Rolex size. We've seen it on the Day-Dates, the Datejusts, the Oyster Perpetuals. Frankly, it is correct. We've seen it on the Explorers. It is a man's size from the mid-20th century that today could be considered something of a unisex option. Ladies and men can both wear it. Just take note, this was once a universal Rolex case size for men, and that is its roots. We have a little bit of a domed bezel and a low flank, meaning the watch slides easily underneath the cuff. And given its short span across the wrist, I can recommend it for wrists as small as 13 centimeters circumference. Once again, my wrist is 16 centimeters. Rolex has its own foundry. It makes its own cases, clasps, and bracelets, and it also uses its own steel. Although it's not the only watchmaker to use 904L steel, it is certainly the most prolific, and 904L is anything but common in the industry. It is a more corrosion-resistant steel that does not need to be rinsed after exposure to body sweat, that is salt from the body, or sea salt, so it's a very resilient anti-corrosive steel. We have an Oyster 3-link bracelet with a conforming end link to better integrate it to the case. You can see the outer face is the bracelet. Links are polished, the tops are satinated, removable links are fixed by screws, and that on both sides. A feature new to the Oyster Perpetual for this generation is the 5mm tool-free Easy Link adjustment system. Previously, that was not available on the OP. And you can see that internally there are actually 3 little divots drilled inside the clasp. So you have 3 anchoring points for the bracelet and the clasp, and you can make that adjustment using a strap tool. Because this is an OP, it has the stamped crown that has depth rather than the raised and relieved version. The flanks of the clasp are polished. Across the top, it's satinated. We have a little beak and a hook, and it is a spring-activated lift lock system that you really have to lift and unlock. It's not friction fit. It can't simply pop open accidentally. The internal clasp is thick gauge steel, just like the clasp body, and it's all of high polish, another feature that's new in this generation of OPs. They used to be media blasted, minimally finished inside. Now, the case band is handsome. You can see this is actually a lot like the Day-Dates and the Datejusts in terms of its profile. It's not the super case you find on the GMTs, the Subs, the Sea Dwellers, and the Explorer 2s. Lug hoods are satinated, case flanks are polished. The bezel is domed rather than the conical profile often seen on steel Datejusts. The domed bezel gives this watch a little bit of a bubble back look. As the Oyster Perpetual back in 1933, nicknamed the bubble back, it became the first modern format Rolex watch. The first OP combined the Oyster water-resistant case of 1926 with the Perpetual rotor winding system of 1933. Not only did it create the first modern format Rolex, but it was arguably the progenitor of the entire sports watch genre. We have that lovely turquoise blue dial, which is a rich, glossy lacquer. We also have Rolex's Chromolite blue lume. You can see the indices are doubled at 3, 6, and 9 for easier reading. Rolex makes its own lume. Heck, Rolex makes its own shock protection. It makes its own lubricants. It makes its own lume. It is fully integrated case, bracelet, clasp, movement, and dial. The crown, as well as the hands and indices, are 18-karat white gold, so over time, moisture that might intrude into the watch will not cause them to oxidize or dim or dull or change color or cloud. Of course, on the reverse side, we have the traditional solid Oyster caseback, and underneath that, Rolex manufacturer caliber 3230. Bidirectional automatic winding. It replaces the smooth but fragile jeweled staff of the old 3130 with a new rotor bearing. It uses a ball bearing. It's a bidirectional winder. It has a 70-hour power reserve. Pivots on 31 jewels. Beats weight 8 beats per second. It is free sprung with a full balance bridge for toughness against shock. And it uses an anti-magnetic niobium zirconium blue oxidized hairspring that Rolex calls Parachrom Blue, helping the watch to be shock resistant, water resistant to 100 meters with a screw down crown, and anti-magnetic. The timepiece is a COSC certified Swiss chronometer, but it's more, as Rolex cases up the chronometer certified movement and tests it in 6 positions, not 5, to run no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per 24 hours. The basis for that term superlative chronometer on the dial. Rolex also uses a handmade Breguet overcoil hairspring, so regardless of the position on the wrist or your dresser at night, the watch will keep even time because of the centered mass of an overcoil hairspring. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing.